Hey guys, Chris here from the Amp Life. Welcome back to yet another video. And in today's video, I want to talk about what I think are some of the biggest mistakes that I made in my early days and latter days as an amputee. And I hope that by sharing some of these with you guys, maybe you can avoid making some of these mistakes. I must add, these are mistakes that I made. You might not necessarily make the same mistakes, or might not have made them for whatever reasons, or whatever your process is throughout your amputation, losing the leg, and how you dealt with it subsequently. But I've got a couple. I wrote them down, and I hope by sharing them something can change for you, as it did change for me. I want to mention that I'm a very happy, satisfied amputee. I feel like I live a full life. I get to do most of the things that I choose to do. I, of course, have limitations like any other person. And part of what I'm going to talk about today was my inability to accept my limitations, identify them, and accept them. But let's get on with things. So the first thing is, and this is very specific to me, because between the accident that I had a paragliding accident, and actually losing my leg, the actual amputation, there was a four-year period. And if something like this has happened to you, whereby it's an elective process, not traumatic amputation, but elective, you might identify with some of the things that I talk about today. That is to say, when we have to choose to amputate. Of course, this is a very difficult decision for any amputee. I completely acknowledge that, and we all do have our own set of circumstances. But for me, my biggest regret is that I didn't amputate earlier. And from an early stage, I knew that this was not looking good. However, I think in the first year I did live in denial. There are two big moments there that I remember. The first is when the actual cast came off, and remembering when they cut off the cast, how awful the leg looked. It was all folded, and you know, it looked like a wild animal had grabbed my leg and pulled me around. So it was all mangled and it looked awful. So from an aesthetic point of view, I think it did bother me later. Initially, I tried to just think my way and steamroll my way through it. But it was scary to see the amount of damage for the first time after they took the cast off. And the second thing that I remember clearly was about a few months in, I started doing physiotherapy, rehabilitation, and the physio, an excellent physio, tried to bend the knee because it had stiffened, fused. Tried to bend the knee as well as the ankle, and at some point, she said to me, "This thing is rock hard. I can't see how we're going to loosen this up." And by about the fourth or the fifth physio session, I realized that she was right. And I don't think the full impact of what had happened at that point hit me. What I realized from that point on is that I would be disabled. Even if they didn't amputate, I would still have to live with a disability, which would be a stiff leg. And what followed was a lot of difficulty, a lot of infection. I had a ton of operations. I mean, like ultimately in excess of 30. At the time, I think I had around about the 20s, trying to get things sorted out. And so my regret was, I think I realized about a year in that this is not looking good. I'd probably end up in an amputation, and I postponed it for as long as I did. Having said that, I think I went through a process that I necessarily had to go through, which is to realize that I think I'd done everything that I can. And that day I went to go and see the surgeon, and I asked him definitively, "Is there any chance that we can save this leg?" And he said, "Well, you know, if we take some cartilage of your hip, some bone of your hip, and we take some muscle from your butt, and you know, I had a bunch of stuff, and skin grafts and transplants and skin off my back, and already this leg had been stripped of skin to repair the other leg." And he said, and at that point he said, "You might have a 20% chance of regaining some sort of mobility, acceptable mobility." And it was at that point that I knew it was over. And you know, I think from the point I acknowledged that it was over, that I would lose the leg, there was a sense of relief. And ultimately, when I had the amputation done, the relief was overwhelming, because I knew where I stood. I knew that from there I could only go forward in terms of mobility, barring any other complications, but essentially that I would only be able to go forward. So my status had been confirmed, and yeah, what followed from there was a destructive and constructive period of time, but ultimately here I am, and as I said, I'm a very grateful and satisfied, and I guess ultimately happy amputee, which is what we all want to say. All right, the second is mistake that I made that I regret is that I didn't share my struggles with people around me from the beginning. Everything was always positive, you know, I was always doing okay, and I think that sort of affirmation that I wanted is that I can cope, that it's remarkable that you cope despite what had happened, and that I fed off that for quite a while, but ultimately it was denial. It was, I think I was fighting my demons on the side, knowing that this was my life, and it wasn't exactly what I'd planned. And at some point over the past holidays, I think I finally realized that losing my leg changed everything, changed how I interacted with people, to an extent how I related with people, because I wouldn't accept help. It changed the course of my life significantly. And I think it's important that we all come to a point where we can acknowledge that, and from that moment onwards, do things differently, and hopefully achieve the best mobility we can, and find happiness as healthy amputees. The third is initially not acknowledging my limitations. Now I still tend to do that, and because of that I've got a tear in my groin. I'll share that with you guys, but and I'm probably gonna have to go for surgery, and that is from overexertion. And it's not necessarily just overexertion, it's from a period of being quite passive and not doing enough exercise, and then suddenly jumping into it and overdoing things completely. So I think to acknowledge one's limitations so we don't exceed the body's capacity, we don't try and do what we used to want to do as fully able people, that we very clear with ourselves what those are. And yes, the big thing is we don't put our bodies at risk, because I'm getting older, and I can feel that my body is not capable of doing what it did 15 years ago when I lost a leg, 16 years. And I need to keep that in mind. We all need to keep that in mind, that we need to preserve, for instance, the other leg, the residual limb, whatever it is, so that we don't grow old, and it ultimately affects our quality of life. So to accept and acknowledge my limitations and live within those, and consistency in how I exercise my body, I think is really important. The fourth thing is that I regret is that I never took infection more seriously. And infection was my nemesis up to about 3 years ago, when a lot changed, which will bring me to another point later. But I could have managed it better, the infection. I could have avoided a few operations, but not finding the right prosthetics, as well as overexertion when I knew I should stop, and not resting my residual limb, I think was the best thing. Every now and then keeping the socket and liner off for a while, the leg off, and just managing by using crutches, caused unnecessary strain on the residual limb, and ultimately resulted in a lot of infection and a lot of operations. And you know, I have visions, and I remember being, for instance, in the shower, and the infection had reached a point where it was just awful, and I kind of rejected my body at that point. I felt contaminated by the infection, and that's something of the past now, and that's as a result of better prosthetics, without a doubt, and moving differently, making adjustments in how I walk. But I'm going to come back to that one. All right. The fifth thing I regret is, from the beginning, is not finding my voice as an amputee with my prosthetist, and not sharing my objections, my preferences, which you know, there was a lack of communication between the two of us, and that is, I think, because I idealized the prosthetist, and I thought, you know, this person has done so much for so many amputees, and I knew I should just, and I kind of followed the person blindly. It's not his fault, that's on me. I guess my message to you is, find your voice when you work with your prosthetist, or any medical person for that matter, who's helping you move through this amputation. Speak up when you feel uncomfortable or disagree with a particular suggestion with regards to prosthetics. Where are we now? 5 or 6? I think it's 6. The thing that I regret is being satisfied with a less than adequate prosthetic, in particular the socket. You know, the thing with the socket is, you don't know that it's right until you get the right one. So I was kind of left wondering, or kind of left thinking that whatever I was wearing is the best that I'd find. And up to 3 years ago, when an absolute gifted prosthetist made a socket that when I put it on, I knew this is it, that I found my socket nirvana. It just felt right. It felt like it had been molded onto my leg, and there were no particular points where I could feel additional pressure. It was evenly distributed, minimum lateral movement, almost zero pistoning. In addition to that, he helped me adjust my gait, and that changed like almost everything. What he had done and the prosthetic setup that he put together for me when I switched to Ossur equipment kind of changed so much, opened up my life to so many more possibilities. So I want to urge you to make sure that you get your relationship spot on, your needs are understood, and that you're not satisfied with anything less than a really good fit. And if you have repeated infections or abrasions, to address that and to make sure that that you find what you need that gives you the comfort that we deserve as amputees. It brings me to the next one, which is Ossur have something that they call the total solution. And what that is about is that your foot, your prosthetic, and your socket, and your liner, your suspension, should all come together to form the ideal solution for your particular needs. And when my prosthetist got that right, I got the Proprio foot. I also used the Torsion, which worked beautifully. I started wearing the Rheo, the Ossur Rheo XC, and he made me that perfect fit like a glove socket. And I changed my suspension to my Iceross liner. Everything changed. It all came together like a symphony, I guess, in a way. And walking out of his practice that day, after it had been fitted, I was in wonder of what was possible. And for the first time realized what I denied myself for many years. I don't blame myself. I don't blame anyone. In my whole journey, I've never blamed anyone. But I also think at the same time it's acknowledged where I or others made mistakes, or I allowed others to make mistakes with regards to that prosthetic. So pursue that total solution. Make sure that you get what you need and that it all comes together to form that symphony that a prosthetic is supposed to feel like, in a way. And I think we're at 8 now, but another thing I regret is, without a doubt, is at some point is gaining too much weight. I wasn't watching my diet, I certainly wasn't active enough, and I got up to about 92 kilograms. When I look at myself now, my wife calls me chubby cheeks because I wasn't hugely overweight, but I was carrying about 15 kilos too much. When I think of 15 kilos and I think of, say, for instance, 2-liter milk canisters, I was dragging around 7 or 8 of those with me all day long. It's like having a backpack with 15 kilos in all day long, and losing all that weight. The new prosthetics, well-fitting prosthetics, the total solution, that really changed a lot. All those factors coming together really changed a lot. So make sure, my weight came down to what I am at the moment, which is about 88, which is a good weight for me. Sorry, 78, 15 kilos in total that I lost, and it's a game changer. It really changed a lot. The importance of looking at our weight. Guys, I think those are. I'm going to add one, but I think those are the main things. The one I want to add is that to do a lot of research, to do what you're doing now, to watch videos, for us to take in tips from other people. There are a lot of people out there that have had a lot of good experiences, that have, that can teach us a lot. There are support groups. Eventually I started attending support groups when I started identifying more as somebody, as an amputee, not as a fully able-bodied person, which also took me a while. That's another discussion. But do your research. There's a ton of information out there. There are books that the manufacturers of the prosthetics specifically supply. Also talk about their total solution, for example, in their book, and I urge you to go and read up on that. I want to talk about a final one briefly, which was my tendency to compare myself to able-bodied people. For instance, I enjoyed going out to the ocean, and I wanted to start surfing again. Obviously, I would have to kneeboard. And I do remember the first time I decided, bugger this, to hell with it, I'm just going to go out as the amputee on a surfboard, paddling out and duck diving into that first wave emerging. I was tearful because I don't know, there'd been a weight off my shoulders that I needed to just get into it and do it, not compare myself to others, embrace my body, who I am, and pursue life that was best suited to me, best quality of life suited to me. All right, guys, that's my story for today. It's been a while since I've posted a video, but I'm hoping today's content makes up for that. If you can identify with any of these, or there are more that you can share with us, please do so. If you want us to elaborate on any specific point we've spoken about today, I'm happy to do so. Please let me know in the comments and tell us what your struggles were for us to learn from you. Guys, if you're not subscribed yet, please do so. Click that bell for notification when I post new videos, and thank you very much for being here today and listening, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Ciao.